the later part of my career coincided with the rise of social media. And the reason I liked that in diplomacy is when I started, and for a long, long time, diplomacy in most countries was seen as very elite, very distant, quite remote. Most people thought ambassador was a grand title, but had no idea really what an ambassador did. I think the most important thing we did in some ways was barely had I arrived in 2014, and you remember there was, seems a long time ago now, but there was the Ebola crisis. I worked very closely with the then and now President, John Dramani Mahama.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Career Spotlight. So I'm Vanessa Ajimai, and today I'm super excited to be joined by someone whose career has taken him across continents. So he's served as the UK's High Commissioner to Ghana, an ambassador to Chile and Mexico, and he's held several other top foreign official roles. He's known for his wit, honesty, and very human approach to leadership. So today we have with us Jon Benjamin.
Hello, Vanessa.
Hi, Jon. Thank you once again so much for coming here.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, cool. So we're going to go straight into it. The first question is so you've had such a dynamic career, and whether it's from leading UK diplomacy in Ghana or representing Britain in Chile and beyond, if you had to describe your journey in a phrase, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think the phrase I probably use is, if you let me expand on it, Vanessa, is chapters. And the reason I say that is because most jobs or careers are a bit more linear, and you might stay in the same place for years and years and years. I appreciate that for my generation, it was much more common to have a single lifelong career, maybe, than for your generation and people coming up now who expect to do several different things. But the point about that's fairly unique about diplomacy, whether that's on behalf of a country or maybe working for the UN or international bodies, is that although you have one overall career, you change both the substance of your job and where you do it every 3, 4, 5 years for decades. And of course, that can be both very exciting for a lot of people. It's very disruptive as well. You can imagine packing up everything you have and moving every few years, particularly when you acquire a family and perhaps children. And then, of course, you've got the spouse's career, and you've got the educational angle, and that you've got the language issue as well, depending on where you go. It becomes more complicated, obviously. So it's a great career. It's not a good career for people who don't like traveling and who don't like changing their particular venue, you know. But it's very so lots of chapters, and which means it's very varied. And it continues to be a popular career. If you look here in the UK, if you look at the numbers of people who apply for the graduate scheme in the Foreign Office every year, you're still talking about I think 25 to 30,000 people can apply for 40 openings. It's very competitive, and it's very popular. One thing I would add, Vanessa, is particularly for your much younger viewers, everyone is much younger than me these days, I find. But um, of course, when I started way back in the 1980s, in the Margaret Thatcher era, in the UK's terms, then the the retirement age was 60, right? It actually went up a bit while I was in the career. But for young people starting now, the retirement age may be well into the 70s. So it means there's the prospect of people having two or three completely different careers during their working lifetime. So a diplomatic career could be in the future for, say, 20, 30 years and you do something else for 20, 30 years. That's not what I did, but that is certainly a scenario that sounds credible for the future.
It shows that you've seen different angles. So you mentioned in terms of like disruption, and it's not, for example, for people that don't like traveling. Before you went into it, did you kind of have an idea of what it would entail or what it was going to be like?
Yeah, because I'd always been interested in it since a kid. In fact, I'm very glad it worked out because it was always what I wanted to do, and I'm not quite sure what I'd have done otherwise. I always liked
Mm.
languages. Languages was my favorite subject at school. I did international relations and languages at university. So yeah, I always had that kind of wanderlust, wanting to see different parts of the world, to learn about different cultures, and to um, get involved in international relations in a very practical way. So, yeah, I did, but it's the sort of thing that if people are interested in this career path, certainly research it very thoroughly. And as far as possible, talk to other people who've done this career to see what it would be like in practice.
Sure. Talking about what it looks like in practice, some people might be wondering, what really does diplomacy mean?
Mm,
What does a diplomat do? Because maybe their exposure to it might be, for example, from the Diplomat within
yeah,
Netflix, and so it's the TV version and not real terms. So how
yeah.
would you explain that?
So diplomacy in broad terms is the management of relations both between countries, country A and country B directly, and internationally, all of the countries together or groups of countries together, for example, in the UN, or in the Council of Europe, or in the African Union. Um, and it's about the management of those relations. Now, within that, there are lots of different strands. There are political relations, economic relations, the commercial relations, the export, import, and investment relationship between those countries, for example. There are defense relations, there are cultural relations. So, in a really big embassy, you'll get departments within an embassy dealing with all those things. Perhaps for the mythical average person, whether in the UK or Ghana or anywhere else, the most likely part of diplomacy that they will ever come across is what we call consular affairs. In other words, if you're the citizen of country A and you're visiting country B as a tourist or on business, and you get into trouble, you get sick, you get arrested, God forbid, or something else goes wrong, you'll call on the consular section of an embassy to come and help you. So that's very important too, because it's the most public facing, very, very often aspect of diplomacy, and the one that most people are most likely to come across if they encounter troubles. And of course, so an ambassador, when you move up the chain, you're overseeing all of those aspects and moving between them. It makes it a very varied job. So on any given day, you might be dealing with a high profile consular case that I just mentioned, someone in trouble. You might be helping a company to win a deal. You might be negotiating an agreement between the country you're in and your home country. You might be preparing for a political meeting between ministers, and it can be extremely varied and often unexpected. There were many days at all level when I got up thinking the day was all planned out and something unexpected would happen, and which you have to deal with. So it involves quite a lot of resilience, quite a lot of personal flexibility to change. If you're the sort of person who likes a very predictable, rigid, disciplined kind of time frame, possibly not the career for you either. You've got to
Mm.
be prepared to change everything on a dime and respond to whatever comes up. But diplomacy at its heart is about the management of good international relations, trying to prevent or solve conflicts, but then develop relations to the mutual benefit of the people in the countries concerned.
Sure. That's a lot of a lot
Yeah,
involved. So early on you mentioned about different working in within different cultures.
yeah,
So what's like the biggest lesson that you've learned about people and leadership?
yeah. It's a good question. Of course, across the whole world, and I worked on every continent. Um, Cultures are very, very different. Yet there are basic human tendencies and desires which are also the same, right? In what terms of the basics that people want for their lives and their families and their children and their friends. Um, but understanding the cultural differences, understanding that the same set of facts or the same emotions can be handled very differently in different cultures is important. Um, Understanding the history of the countries you're in is very, very important. And of course, a big part of diplomacy is learning the languages of the countries you're in. And I learned several over the time. It certainly helps you to understand the culture. And so, for example, I'm married to a lady from Chile, and we speak Spanish. It's our first language at home.
Nice.
But I only started learning Spanish when I got posted there already in my late 40s, very unexpectedly. So there's lots of aspects to a cultural relation. Incidentally, a very high percentage of people who do diplomacy as a career end up with a partner from another country and another culture. And if you think about it, that's entirely natural if they're spending most of their lives at the sort of age where people typically find a life partner. If you're not in your home country, then it's quite likely you'll find a partner elsewhere where you happen to be. The cultural differences are very important to understand and to bridge, but they're not just a professional matter. They can easily become a personal matter because wherever you're posted, you also want to make personal friends as you would anywhere. Um, so it's a fascinating area, and understanding how things can be interpreted differently in different cultures is a very key part of the job in diplomacy.
Sure. What languages do you speak out of interest?
Well, I speak quite a few. French from school. We had to do French in those days. It's no longer the case in the UK, but in my day it was obligatory. So German is what I did my degree in. Swedish as well. I lived in Sweden for a while, and then in my diplomatic career, I learnt Indonesian, Turkish, and Spanish. And of all those, by far the most difficult as a native English speaker was Turkish.
Uh,
It's because it's a very different grammar, a very different syntax, very different vocabulary. Beautiful language, but it very, very challenging. But of course, learning a language automatically teaches you quite a lot, consciously or subconsciously, about those cultural differences.
sure. So normally when you'd get posted to a different country, what kind of would be the process to settling in and
Hmm.
understanding how the culture works there?
It does depend a little bit on the individual. You, of course, get training programs to do with the job you're going to do and the country you're going to go to. And if you learn a language, then of course you can work into the language curriculum. You can work in, while you're learning the language, you can ask the teacher to read articles about history, about the geography, about the religion, about the socioeconomics of the country you're going to, is another good way of learning. Um, and then, of course, in an embassy, certainly in the case of the UK, on average, if you look at an embassy overseas, only about, say, 20% of the people, the staff in the embassy are like you, diplomats sent from the home country. All the rest are local staff. So in the High Commission in Accra, for example, 80% plus of all the staff were Ghanaians, right? So as a foreigner coming in, you have a ready-made group there amongst your colleagues to help you understand more about the culture, um, perhaps to take you to events, to describe what's going on, to teach you about local issues and so on. So that's very helpful because in any embassy you'll have a large number of home country employees who are from that culture and can help you settle in. But it also depends a lot on the individual person making the effort, right, to understand, to study, to learn. But for me, I think it's also about your personal enjoyment of a place will be your professional satisfaction and your personal enjoyment will be so much greater if you understand a lot about how the culture operates, how people think, what they think, etc. Otherwise, you're just a bit of a bystander. So it's quite important to do that. But also, as I said at the outset, Vanessa, if each posting is only about 3 or 4 years,
Mm.
you've really got to get up to speed pretty quickly. You can't take 3 years learning about it because you've got to start writing your reports as soon as you get there. So
Mm.
it's also about doing all of that as quickly as reasonably possible.
Sure. So you mentioned before about Accra. So I know that Ghana's uh, quite a big part of your story.
Mm.
What's an experience or memory from your time that you'd say that makes you smile when you think about it?
Yeah. Well, perhaps a couple of examples. Yeah, I loved my time in Ghana. It was my only posting on the African continent. I'm still very connected,
I see on TikTok,
including on social media.
me on Twitter.
And the interesting thing, so one of the very interesting things about Ghana is that although, as I said, diplomacy is about government to government relations and managing them to solve problems and increase cooperation. What's interesting about Ghana is the totality of the relationship between Britain and Ghana goes very far beyond government, right, and official relations. Because of the colonial history, because of the fact there are no one knows for sure, but there are hundreds of thousands of British citizens like yourself of Ghanaian origin, which means that there's a very strong human personal link between the two countries that's way beyond the government sphere. That made it very interesting because you're talking about entrepreneurs, footballers, you name it, pop stars. There are a bridge between the two countries, and I think that made it a very rich experience. I think lots of very good memories about Ghana. I think the most important thing we did in some ways was barely had I arrived in 2014, and you remember there was, seems a long time ago now, but there was the Ebola crisis,
Mm,
which was which started in, where was it? Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, and in the end was limited to those countries. But for a while, it looked inevitable that it was going to make its way across Cote d'Ivoire and into Ghana and beyond. So I worked very closely with the then and now President John Dramani Mahama and with people like the Asante Hini, um, and Kofi Annan of late and blessed memory, to work out a way in which the UN could base its operation to combat Ebola at basically out of Accra Airport, which became the hub for operations, international operations for a long time. And it was great working on that because that was about helping real people. If it had gone badly wrong, thousands and thousands of people could have died in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and perhaps beyond into Nigeria. And indeed, as I said, it looked like that was becoming almost inevitable. But that international effort helped roll back the tide against Ebola, and eventually, and it meant working with lots of countries, including countries that weren't always natural partners, like Cuba, which is well known for its medical knowledge and doctors, and we worked very well together. So that was a fairly amazing experience. It seems like a very long time ago now. People forget,
yeah.
perhaps because COVID happened since, right? So people forget. But Ebola um, really looked like it might completely swamp the whole region. So the work that we all did then contributed to a fantastic result in stopping the spread of that. Otherwise, I've got lots of happy memories because I got to know so many people in the
Hmm.
music world and in football, the Black Stars, and in culture and in all aspects. But I'm very glad to have met so many people from so many different walks of life and to have traveled around Ghana because Ghana is the same as very many countries around the world, including the UK, in that the capital city is not representative of the whole country. The capital city is where most of the money is and the political power, often the economic power, but it's not the existence of most people in the country. So it's important to travel. And of course, I went up to the upper north, the upper east. I went with my friend Wiala, the singer,
Oh yeah.
to her village of Funsi near Wa in the upper west, and to see that reality was amazing. And of course, it was very different to Accra.
Hmm. Sure. So earlier on, you touched on in terms of the Ebola crisis.
Yeah,
I know that every career kind of does have its ups and downs. How did you like remain grounded during really like tough times?
yeah. Well, it certainly does have challenges. And actually, having mentioned Ebola, on a personal level, sickness is one of those challenges. I mean, my wife and son, who he was very small then, they both got malaria, for example, in Ghana. Um, I had pneumonia a couple of times traveling around the world, and I lost count of the number of times around the world I got food poisoning, which can you usually recover from fairly quickly, can it? But it can be very, very unpleasant while it's happening. Um, and then there are professional challenges. I think I mentioned the word resilience before. Um, it's being able to bounce back from setbacks and mistakes and your own mistakes and other people's mistakes which affect you, and the ability not to dwell on it for too long, to try and learn the lessons and move on. And but there are other challenges which I mentioned at the outset. Uh, I've really enjoyed the experience of living in lots of countries. I have never enjoyed the experience of having to pack the whole house up yet again every 3 or 4 years, because all of us accumulate too much stuff in our lives, and you have to. Well, it's good discipline to keep throwing away stuff you don't need anymore. But that's a constant challenge and it's not just packing up physically.
Mhm.
Um, you're starting again to make friends and to to establish a network every few years in a different culture, maybe a different language, a different country, and that is a challenge, of course. But all of those challenges are outweighed by the enjoyment and the interest of a career like that.
Yeah, sure. And in terms of what like a good diplomat looks like you're known for being quite honest and witty, which wouldn't always seem like the typical
Yeah,
diplomat. So how do you kind of balance that aspect of being bringing yourself to the table and then
yeah.
with the job?
Vanessa, I think in any career, you've got to try and be authentically yourself. Because if you're not yourself, and we're all very different people, right? And that's totally legitimate. If you're not yourself, then you're effectively acting, right? Because you're covering up aspects of yourself to fit in with maybe what you think others expect. It's very stressful acting the whole time. Ask an actor; they'll tell you that it's pretending to be something you're not, or not being something that you are, is is a real kind of self-imposed stress. So it's important to find your true self. One of the things I found was that, of course, the later part of my career coincided with the rise of social media. And the reason I liked that in diplomacy is when I started, and for a long, long time, diplomacy in most countries was seen as very elite, very distant, quite remote, Most people thought ambassador was a grand title, but had no idea really what an ambassador did. So I think that's been very useful to try and humanize it and explain it and get closer to ordinary people as well. But everyone's got to find their own way, right? And again, being true to your own personality and your own experience. Diplomacy is probably not a great career for huge introverts because you do have to build networks of contacts and meet people and host events and do a lot of public speaking, which for some people love, and other people it causes complete panic. So it is a job more for a more kind of extrovert sort of person, because there is a lot of public facing aspects of it. But my advice, it doesn't matter what career you're going for. I think my advice would be your authentic self as much as you can, but also know what your strengths and weaknesses are and invite feedback. Don't take it personally. None of us are perfect. In fact, all of us are very, very far from perfect. So it's natural that there'll be critical feedback, which you should, as we all grow and learn and grow older, which we should all try and feed back into how we perform. But be yourself, because trying to pretend to be someone else is just painful.
Sure. And you've now transitioned into a new roles outside of
Mm.
diplomacy. Do you want to tell us a
Yeah.
bit about that?
I think what you're trying to say is I've got old and I've retired. So yeah, so after 40 years working for the government, I've retired from the public service, and I now work as a consultant. I run the International Free Speech Union, defending rights of free speech around the world. I work on some business matters. I do some pro bono advice for some NGOs and other things. It's interesting. It's quite liberating because I've had 40 years of bureaucracy and rules and HR departments and all sorts of things, filling in forms and all that sort of stuff. So I'm quite liberated from that. Um, there are a few aspects I miss from the former career, but I kind of did it for a long time, so not so much. I think it's just part of human existence that as you get older, you become more and more aware of how finite time is and your lifetime is. So it's a question of trying to get lots of different experiences while still kind of young enough and fit enough and energetic enough to be able to do that. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying having more time as well, because certainly at ambassador level, there are a lot of demands on your time outside normal office hours, a lot of evening events, lunches, dinners. Um, it's a career where it's very easy to put on weight, by the way, because there's so much entertainment going on the whole time. So to have a bit more freedom like that is certainly very welcome, and to have different sorts of experience is terrific. Um, but this maybe links back to something we talked about earlier. For people of your generation and younger generations coming through, I think it will become more typical for people to have a real kind of portfolio career over the course of basically half a century, right? If people are entering the workforce in their early 20s and not really retiring till their early 70s, then that's time to do lots of very, very different things.
Yeah,
There's that old saying that variety is the spice of life, right? So that would be my reflection on that. But I know every old person says this, but time really does fly back by, especially obviously when you're looking back. So make the most of it.
yeah. And has now that you're the one that says you're older now, now that you're older, has your view of success changed?
Yes, I think it's different for different people, but success has got to be at least as much about your personal sentiment and levels of happiness. And of course, there's professional success, there's personal success, family success, there's all different kinds of success. Um, But I guess my reflection would be, don't become preoccupied with what other people think or wider society thinks. It's about your own goals and objectives and whether you're achieving them.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks for coming to share your insights. And I'm sure those watching will be able to pick some nuggets from that. So that was really insightful.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I hope that maybe someone watching at some point will apply for diplomatic service either here in UK or wherever their home country is, and start along this track. And it is very worthwhile. But I'm very, very glad that Ghana was one of the stops I had along the road on this in this job.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.